They said funerals bring out the best in people. Ours brought out a clipboard and a tow truck. As I stood graveside, suit still stiff with starch, a woman pointed at my truck like it was some stray animal. "It's not authorized to park here," she barked, eyes glinting with petty power. What she didn't know, what no one saw coming, was who had driven that truck. Because when the door opened, and a tall black man in judicial robes stepped out, the air went still, and for the first time, Karen looked afraid. The sun hung low and heavy in the sky, casting a copper sheen over the manicured lawns and white fences that lined the neighborhood. My hands were clenched tighter than I realized, until the funeral director gave me a soft nudge toward the front. I nodded, stepping forward in a suit that still smelled like dry cleaner starch, the collar pressing too hard against my throat. My father would have hated all the fuss, but he would have liked the turnout. Friends from the auto shop, the VA center, a few old customers who still owed him money but came anyway. He had a way of making people feel seen, even when he was bone-tired or in pain. We moved in quiet procession past homes that didn't know him, didn't care. A few neighbors peered through curtains as if a funeral might disturb their property values. The HOA had sent an email requesting we limit guest parking, as if grief came with a permit number. But we came anyway, family first. And my father's family didn't always wear the same skin, but they all knew how to hold a wrench, tell a good joke, or carry a man when his knees gave out. The chapel sat at the edge of the community, modest and sun-warmed, the kind of place my father used to drive past with a nod of approval. "That's where a man should be laid to rest," he once said. I parked his truck out front, the one he left me in his will. It gleamed like he'd washed it just yesterday, waxed to a mirror shine despite the age. A few mourners paused to touch the hood like it was sacred, like they knew he was in there somehow. I stood beside it a moment too long, hoping the air would ease the knot in my chest. I didn't notice the woman in the polo shirt and clipboard until she stepped around the truck, squinting at the windshield like it owed her something. The truck wasn't just transportation. It was memory-made metal. A '91 Silverado, navy blue with a silver trim that caught the light like chrome water. My father had bought it used but treated it like it was born in his hands. He polished it every Sunday, rain or shine, and cursed every scratch like it was a personal betrayal. I learned to drive in that truck. He sat beside me, one arm resting out the window, sipping coffee from the same chipped thermos he kept in the glove box. When I stalled on a hill, he didn't raise his voice. He waited, told me to breathe, told me it wasn't about speed, it was about control. That's how he taught everything. He'd welded a small brass plate onto the dash that read, "Earned, not given." I asked him once if it was from the army, and he said no, said it was from life. That kind of quiet wisdom followed him everywhere. The men at the shop respected him without needing to be told why. Even after his back started giving out, he still came in early, worked slower but smarter. Folks came by just to sit with him, get a story or a laugh or a little silence. When the cancer came, he kept the truck cleaner than ever, said it gave him something to do, something that still made sense. The last time he drove it was to his final appointment, though I offered to take him. He refused, told me if he couldn't drive himself, he wasn't going. So I watched him pull out of the driveway with the windows down, and his old war cap perched on the dash. That was his salute to the world. Now the truck sat outside the chapel, like a sentry. I had detailed it myself the night before, not because it needed it, but because it felt like the last thing I could do for him. The seat still smelled faintly of tobacco and engine grease. I imagined him riding shotgun, saying nothing, just nodding, like he always did when words weren't needed. And for a moment, standing there in that parking lot with my hand on the door, I wasn't a grown man burying his father. I was a boy again, waiting for the keys. I didn't see her at first. My eyes were on the casket, on the curve of my uncle's back as he leaned on his cane, on the quiet tremble of my mother's hands as she reached into her purse for a tissue she didn't use. The murmurs around us had started to settle. A few guests were gathering near the chapel entrance, waiting for the pastor. Everything felt suspended, like the moment before a storm breaks. That was when the white SUV rolled up with a sharp little hum and parked too close to the curb. She stepped out like she owned the concrete. Polo shirt with an HOA badge stitched above her chest, clipboard tucked tight under her arm, sunglasses that hid everything but the scowl already forming on her lips. She didn't walk toward the chapel. She walked straight to the truck, My father's truck. Bent down at the windshield and started scribbling. I moved without thinking, walked up slow, careful not to raise my voice, and asked if there was a problem. She didn't look up, just said the vehicle was in violation. Said this was not a public lot, and that unauthorized vehicles were subject to immediate removal. Her voice was clipped, every word polished like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. I told her this was my father's funeral. Told her the truck belonged to him. She blinked once, then checked her watch like she was running behind. Said she was just doing her job. Then she pulled out her phone and started dialing. I heard her say the words, tow authorization, and non-compliant vehicle. Behind me, the chapel door opened. Someone called my name. I didn't turn. The only thing I could look at was her pen scratching across the ticket pad, like it was her signature on my father's goodbye. I told her again, slower this time, that we were here for a funeral. My voice was even, but it had a weight to it I didn't bother softening. She gave a tight smile, the kind people use when they think they're being reasonable. Said she was sorry for my loss, then pointed at a barely visible sign posted near a trimmed hedge. It listed parking restrictions in small print. She tapped it like it was scripture. I told her we'd be done in under an hour, that no one else was being blocked, that the truck wasn't hurting anyone. She glanced back at it with her nose wrinkled, like it was some old eyesore she couldn't wait to be rid of. Then she said if it wasn't moved within 10 minutes, she'd have no choice but to follow procedure. The tow truck was already on its way. She made sure I knew that. Said it twice. I asked her to wait. Told her my father was a veteran, that this truck meant something. She looked at me like she'd heard that excuse before, like grief was a tactic. When I stepped closer, her posture stiffened. She clutched the clipboard to her chest and took a step back, but her voice got louder, told me to calm down. Told me she didn't want to call someone, but she would. Her eyes scanned the crowd behind me, like she was building witnesses. I took a breath and stepped back. My hands were open. I told her the service was starting, that we'd move the truck after. She just shook her head, already turning away to make another call. I watched her walk back to her SUV, heels clicking like a metronome on the pavement. Not once did she look at the casket, or the people wiping their eyes, or the man we'd come here to honor. Her focus was fixed on control, and control, she thought, meant power. Until the truck door opened, and someone else stepped out. I first met him when I was 12, sitting cross-legged on the garage floor, passing my father wrenches while he worked on a beat-up Oldsmobile that never wanted to start. The man was young back then, maybe mid-20s, thin and serious, with quiet eyes and shoes too clean for our shop. He watched my father's hands like they held answers. Said very little, always listened. I didn't know what to make of him. My father called him Reggie. Reggie started showing up every weekend, not for repairs, not for money. He came to learn. My father had a gift for spotting what a man carried behind his silence, and Reggie carried a lot. He was in law school, scraping by on loans and side jobs, trying to keep up with a world that didn't want him in it. My father never asked questions, just handed him a rag and told him to start with oil pans. He said you don't trust a man who won't get his hands dirty. Sometimes they talked politics or philosophy, but mostly they talked about people, about how a man should treat others when no one is watching. Reggie listened like he was thirsty. When he spoke, it was careful, never wasted. My father told me once that Reggie reminded him of himself at that age, only smarter. Years passed. Reggie graduated, then clerked for a federal judge. When he came back to town for visits, he never arrived empty-handed. He brought lunch from his favorite deli, or new boots for my father when his old ones gave out. Still called him Mr. Rhodes, never by his first name, even after all those years. The last time he visited before my father passed, they sat on the back porch for hours. No tools, no words for long stretches, just the sound of birds and rustling leaves. I brought them lemonade and saw the look in Reggie's eyes. It wasn't just respect, it was reverence. He didn't owe my father money. He owed him direction. When my father got sick, I didn't think to call anyone. I didn't want to bother him. Turns out, I didn't have to. Reggie found out on his own. He called me 2 days before the funeral. Said he'd be there. Said he was bringing the truck. The sound of the engine came low and steady, like a growl held beneath the surface. I turned toward it before I saw anything, just a feeling that something important was shifting. My father's truck, parked where it had been all morning, gave a cough of ignition, then settled into a deep, idle hum. Heads turned. Even the pastor paused mid-sentence. The driver's side door opened, slow and deliberate, like it knew all eyes were waiting. A polished shoe touched the pavement first, then the long sweep of a dark overcoat. Reggie stepped out with the kind of stillness that made people quiet without knowing why. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe just more certain in how he carried himself. His face hadn't changed much, though. Still calm, still watchful. The kind of face that never rushed, never needed to. He wore his robe over a pressed suit, the black fabric catching the sun just enough to draw the eye. There was a quiet finality in the way he closed the door, like he was putting an end to something before it even started. The clipboard woman, Karen, someone whispered, stood frozen by her SUV, phone still in hand. She stared like she was trying to figure out if this was part of the funeral or something else entirely. Reggie walked forward with steady steps, the sound of his shoes crisp against the concrete. He didn't speak right away. He looked at me, then at the casket, and gave a small nod. That was all. The crowd opened around him like water parting for a boat. No one asked who he was. They didn't have to. He stopped near the front, near Karen, who had gone stiff and pale. She lowered the phone slowly, as if unsure what she was looking at. Reggie turned his eyes on her. Not unkind, not angry. Just solid, like granite beneath polished glass. "This truck," he said, voice clear and steady, "belongs to a man I owe everything to." Karen blinked. Reggie didn't flinch. The wind moved through the trees, soft and slow, and for the first time all day, no one made a sound. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Reggie stood with his hands folded in front of him, eyes steady on the woman still gripping her clipboard like it could protect her. A murmur passed through the crowd, but it died quickly. Even the birds seemed quieter. "This truck," he said again, "carried a man who gave more to this community than anyone standing here knows." Karen opened her mouth, maybe to protest, but Reggie continued without looking away. He fixed the cars of people who couldn't pay. He stayed open late for single mothers who needed their engines running before morning shift. He offered his time, his tools, and his silence when others needed dignity more than advice. She tried to interrupt, a weak stammer about regulations, but Reggie's gaze didn't move. When I was broken black and 2 steps from giving up, he handed me a wrench and said, "Start with this." The judge's voice didn't tremble. It landed. He taught me what a man was without ever saying the word. So when you talk about codes, or ordinances, or property value, just understand that none of that adds up to what this man was worth. The pastor stepped back, eyes wide, hands folded. Even the older men in the back, the ones who usually chuckled through everything, had gone still. Karen looked around like someone might step in. No one did. "This isn't about a parking space," Reggie said, softer now. "It's about respect. And if you can't offer that at a funeral, then maybe the problem isn't where the truck is parked. Maybe it's where your heart is parked." He turned then, slow and deliberate, and walked back to the casket without waiting for a response. Karen stood frozen. The clipboard slipped from her hands and landed on the pavement with a dull crack. No one bent to pick it up. And just like that, the service resumed. No more protests, no more threats, only the sound of a flag rustling in the breeze, and the quiet breath of people remembering what honor was supposed to look like. The moment should have ended there. The silence was full, respectful, something close to sacred. But some people don't know when to let things be. Karen reached down and picked up her clipboard, brushing the gravel dust from the edge like it had been personally insulted. Her face had gone red, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper. Pride, maybe. Fear disguised as defiance. She cleared her throat and stepped forward again, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand this is emotional," she said, her voice tight, "but we still have rules in this community. Exceptions set precedents." Reggie didn't move. His back was to her now, standing beside the casket, hands folded again. The sun glinted off the seal pinned to his chest. Karen's gaze caught it, and for a moment her eyes narrowed, like she wasn't sure what she was seeing. "I'll need to speak with the owner of the truck directly," she added louder now. "If they refuse to move it, I'll have to report it." Reggie turned slowly, reached into his coat, and pulled out a small black case. He opened it without a word and held it toward her. Inside was his badge, Federal Circuit Court, polished and unmistakable. Her mouth parted slightly, like her next sentence got lost somewhere between her throat and her clipboard. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The badge said enough. Karen stood frozen, then took one slow step back, then another. Her voice never returned. She turned, walked to her SUV, and closed the door harder than she needed to. The tow truck never came. It must have been called off. Or maybe the driver saw something in the air and thought better of it. Either way, the lot stayed quiet, and the truck stayed right where it belonged. The guests settled again, quieter this time, not just out of respect but out of something heavier. Reverence, maybe. I stood near the truck, close enough to hear the low idle still running in its chest, and watched Reggie step back beside me. His face was calm, but there was a tightness at the edges of his mouth, the kind that only showed up when a man was holding something back. He glanced toward where Karen's SUV had been, now gone, then looked out at the crowd like he was trying to measure whether the words he held belonged to them. He spoke anyway. "My father left before I ever learned to shave," he said. "I didn't have a man to teach me right from wrong, to tell me what respect looked like in a world that doesn't always offer it. But I had this man." He nodded toward the casket. "I had Mr. Rhodes." Some heads turned, not out of surprise, but because the name rang deeper now. Reggie went on, voice low but carrying. "He taught me what patience felt like when someone talked down to you. Taught me how to keep your hands steady even when your pride wanted to take the wheel. He never raised a voice, never raised a hand. But he raised me. There wasn't a dry eye within earshot. The old men who had worked beside my father looked down at their shoes, shoulders heavier than before. Reggie's voice didn't waver. Some people think laws only live on paper, but the law remembers the people who shaped it. My father in the courtroom, Mr. Rhodes in the garage, both teaching boys how to become men." He paused, then turned to me. He didn't just leave behind a truck. He left behind a record of kindness, and kindness, once recorded, becomes a kind of law too, one that doesn't expire. I nodded, but my voice didn't work. Reggie stepped back to the truck and turned the key. The engine went quiet. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything we carried and everything we'd just let go. And this time, no one spoke over it. The pastor returned to the pulpit with a small nod, like he understood something had shifted, but didn't need to name it. He cleared his throat and began again, voice softer than before. The scripture felt steadier now, less like a reading and more like a benediction. People gathered closer. The wind had picked up slightly, tugging at jackets and dresses, rustling the trees above the chapel with a hush that sounded like breath being held. My mother squeezed my hand, and I looked over to see her eyes weren't on the pastor. They were on the truck. She gave a small nod, the kind that told me she felt my father was still here. Not just in memory, not just in the casket, but in the quiet stand that had been taken without a single curse or threat. That was his way. Behind us, the tow truck never arrived. Maybe the call had been cancelled. Maybe the driver saw the black robe and the gathered faces and decided it wasn't his fight. Karen was gone too. No sign of her SUV or her clipboard. The space she'd occupied felt like a footprint quickly fading from sand. The service moved on. Friends rose to speak, each story peeling back a layer of the man we had come to bury. Tales of after-hours repairs, quiet acts of generosity, long drives for stranded customers who became lifelong friends. Some stories were familiar, others were not. All of them echoed the same truth. By the time the flag was folded and handed to my mother, the sky had shifted. The sun pushed through the clouds, spreading across the chapel yard in long, golden beams. The air had warmed just enough to lift the chill from our shoulders, and for the first time all day I felt at ease. We had said goodbye, not just to the man in the casket, but to the noise that tried to crowd in around him. His funeral had unfolded the way he lived, quiet, firm, and unshaken, on our terms. When it came time to carry the casket, I stepped forward with the others, but Reggie was already at my side. We lifted in unison, the weight shared evenly between old friends and sons, each of us walking with careful, practiced steps. The path to the gravesite curved gently past a patch of trimmed oaks, their leaves moving just enough to let the light flicker through in pieces. It wasn't a long walk, but it felt like the most important one I'd ever taken. The ground was soft, recently turned. A light breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and wild grass. We lowered my father down with slow precision, the way he'd have lowered an engine block into place. No rush, no stumble, just the kind of quiet control he always believed in. The pastor spoke a final blessing. Voices rose for one last hymn, cracked and uneven but full of feeling. I didn't sing. I just stood there and listened, eyes on the coffin, my hands clasped in front of me. A few folks dropped roses in before the first handfuls of dirt. Others laid their palms gently on the lid, whispering something only they and my father would know. Reggie stood beside me the whole time, shoulders square, face still. When it was done, he turned and walked with me back to the truck. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows that stretched across the chapel yard. We reached the truck, and I rested my hand on the hood, just like I had that morning. "I used to think I owed him everything," Reggie said, not looking at me. "But I think he just gave it, without expecting anything back." I nodded. The words didn't come, not right then. He placed a folded note in my hand, said it was something my father had written the last time they talked. I didn't open it, not yet. We stood there in silence, two men shaped by the same set of hands, one last time beside the truck that had brought him home. Peace, finally, felt real. A few weeks passed before I drove the truck again. I let it sit in the garage for a while, untouched, dust gathering soft as ash on the windshield. Every time I passed by, I'd rest my hand on the side mirror or trace the edge of the hood, like I was checking to see if it still remembered him. When I finally slid into the driver's seat, the smell was still the leather and oil, and the faint trace of tobacco that had soaked into the seams long ago. I sat for a while before turning the key. The engine started like it always had, with a low hum and a little rattle in the left side that never got fixed, because my father said it gave the truck personality. I backed out slow, easing onto the main road that curved past the chapel, past the oaks where we'd said goodbye. The sky was open and clear, the light stretching wide across the pavement. As I came around the bend, I saw the sign had been changed. The old one about parking restrictions and unauthorized vehicles was gone. In its place was a new wooden post, freshly painted. It read, "In memory of Mr. Rhodes' veteran mechanic neighbor." Someone had planted 2 small flags at its base. I didn't know who did it. Maybe the pastor. Maybe someone from the neighborhood who hadn't spoken at the funeral but had listened all the same. I pulled over and let the engine idle, rolled down the window and just sat there, letting the moment settle. No one came to question me. No clipboards, no cold looks. Just the sound of the wind moving through the trees and the steady thrum of the motor beneath me. When I pulled away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The truck rolled on smooth and easy, like it knew where to go. And for the first time in a long time, so did I.